Next one, we got Brandon Irwin says, can you guys do a show on your background? What sports have you played through your life? When did you start arm wrestling? Why did you start arm wrestling? Did you ever do things like powerlifting or weightlifting competitively? Do you have a family and a full-time job? If so, how do you schedule in training? When and why did Gobby start his troll personality? Do you have other hobbies and interests? Seems like Gobby might be a bit of a cinephile. All that crap. Thanks, and great show, guys. So instead of us answering all those questions, we should make maybe a separate video after this one and see if we can tackle that.
Yeah.
And maybe post it as a separate video, because there's a lot there, and the people that are interested in hearing all that stuff will watch, and the other ones can probably just stick to the regular video. So potentially, if we have time today, we could do that and post it as a separate video on the channel.
Yep.
Thoughts?
Yeah, it's a great idea. I mean, I can fill an episode. You know, each of us can probably fill an episode on our history and our background and our jobs and this and that. I have a lot of interests outside of arm wrestling that we talked about, and the trolling issue was an evolution that started. Anyway, I can talk about how that manifested itself.
15 years ago on the Northeast board.
I don't know about 15. I was still a pretty nice guy in 2005 to 2007. Something else, maybe 2008ish. I don't know. I just remember staying on home on a Friday night and going on Facebook and just jumping. I just decided I had nothing to do. There's nothing good on TV. I'm just going to jump from post to post and try to aggravate people, and just try to initiate or try to get responses. And then I get a phone call about a half hour later or 45 minutes later from John Milne, and he says, I'm not doing anything tonight. All I decided to do was run around Facebook and following Chris Gobby and laugh at, and it was mostly, I think at the time, I was hitting religious posts. And so at that point I thought, man, if this is entertaining, maybe I should keep at it.
Well, John doesn't like us anymore.
No. Anyone with a green shirt, it's fucking hilarious, because for years I would get messages from Ian, Evan, John, Devin, saying, I saw what you said to this guy. It's fucking hilarious. Don't ever change. I love it. Inviting me into their home, all this stuff, inviting me to practice. And then all I had to do once was disapprove harshly. And I felt that I needed to disapprove harshly with that King's move. And there's blocking, death threats, pure hatred, isolation. And I've always thought that if you and I, for example, we're not really good friends. So if you ask me your opinion,
Gobby, you're hurting my feelings, man.
Well, you know what I'm saying. You know what I'm saying. But we've never hung out and done shit, is my point, right? We
spent time in Tokyo.
That was fun. Yeah, Scott still.
Don't forget Tokyo.
Yeah. I remember us trying to. I was trolling Scott Stillwell. I remember you and I having a discussion in front of him while he was getting mad, and me asking you in the movie Over the Top, who would play Scott Stillwell, and you said the kid on the fucking pinball table. Fuck, was that funny? And Scott was what, almost your size, and he was getting mad at me. He was damn near your size. Anyway, so my point being that I feel if you do something, I can tell you, or I can not tell you. It doesn't really matter. I don't have any investment, as we're not super tight friends. But the more you're tight with somebody, I think the more it's part of your duty to let that person know completely what your honest opinion is ethically of something that they're doing. That's the role of a good friend, or even as you get a better friend or a family member, that is your role. Now they can listen, they can do what they want, but I think it's your role to keep people like that ethically in check. And of course, if they are in check, they'll say, thank you, I appreciate it, or I agree. But anytime there's an aggressive, hostile response, it's indicative of something. And I also think of all of Devin's camp and his friends and his family, I think they all have an opinion that they didn't love the King's move. They won't voice it because their support is unconditional. But I also find it ironic because in 2008 or 9, when he pulled Michael Todd, and Michael Todd was trying to king and he beat it, if Michael Todd would have kinged Devin, you would have had a lot of animosity towards Michael Todd or the King's move. But that's not the case anymore, because it's on the other. And that, to me, is a blatant lack of integrity, to believe in one thing based on one case and not believe it based on another case. I stand by my position, and I just think it was my duty to tell him. I did it aggressively and on social media, because I was more against, not so much about him, but just on the fact that we're having elite guys doing King move, elite superstars, king moving. Anyway, so yeah.
Anyway, we went off on a path there.
Next, yeah.
So we're going to talk about that later with all the guys' questions and all the stuff. Yeah. Now, we had a question on the show, and I think you asked me this. And now the guy, Storm Trigger, says, what single exercise for arm wrestling would you choose, Gobby? Because I answered that question, but you did not. So what is your answer to that? Do the one exercise for arm wrestling and no others. What would it be?
Up to maybe two years ago, the answer, and right from 2005, 2004, my answer would have been the same. And that's, for me, it would be one arm partial static preacher curl with a barbell, different variations, different angles, leaning forward, much like, not so extreme as what Devin did in terms of keeping the body super tight and going up and down, because that's not really my style. But my arm wrestling goes as my bicep goes. So it would definitely be that 90 degrees, 100 degrees. But that is definitely when my number, the number of the dumbbell I move for 7-8 seconds or hold for 7-8-9 seconds, that number, the higher it goes, proportionally goes my arm wrestling performance in the next event or the leading event. So that would have to be in my number one exercise, because I rely so much on the bicep and its ability to statically hold resistance. However, I'd be torn right now, because in the last 2 years I had a pegboard built, and the pegboard's an interesting tool for arm wrestling. I think it might even be the best, because you can put a fat grip on it. You can do a lot of things. I even have on a pegboard, I have a flat finger type adjustment where I can do pegboarding with a flat finger. So if the pressure's right across my fingers as I try to go up and hold, and I can't do much movement, but I can get up there and hold with my body weight, which puts a tremendous amount of stress across the bridge of my fingers, which again is how I stop top rolling. I don't have a big hand, but it's the string, finger strength, flat finger strength. So I would almost lean towards that, only because it's such an incredible, and because when you're doing the pegboard, your lat is completely engaged, your core is engaged, and it tightens your elbow towards your midsection and prevents a separation, or the training itself prevents a separation. And that is 100% transferable to the setup. Because a lot of times the top roller is not always trying to open my hand. He's trying to open up not only my hand from my shoulder, but also my elbow from my midsection. Right, the back pressure from his lat is trying to open that, as well as the back pressure from his brachialis opening up the angle of my hand and my shoulder. So that would be a great, and of course that position too works biceps as well in a static way. So that might be, I'd be torn between that one or the static bicep curls. But I can tell you that I do a lot more of the pegboard than I do of static dumbbell curls in the last year, and my performance seems to be based on last Friday as good as it's ever been, based on who I pulled and comparing it to the last times I pulled them. So I would have to go with maybe the pegboard as the number one arm wrestling exercise, because you can do many things with it. It hits many things, and it's also incredibly great for from core, just general back strength. It's a complete compound, static yet dynamic movement. Can be both, really. It does a lot of things. So I'd probably go with pegboard. So not wrist curls. No, not wrist curls. Wrist curls might be the dumbest fucking thing in the history of arm wrestling training. No, sir. The dumbest training in the history of arm wrestling is gripper strength. Closing grippers.
Yeah, I agree. Yes. Sorry to the grip guys, but yeah, you're right.
I mean, gripping is a sport of its own, so nothing wrong with it. Keep it for gripping. And in terms of wrist curls, I don't think they're the worst thing in the world. If you take a 3-inch fat grip and you put it and you just do a static type on the back of your leg, or on the front of your leg, rather, on a bench to prevent your hand from opening, I see there's merit there. But when someone takes a standard dumbbell size and he's doing a full wrist curl where he's going into the losing position, full flexion, and then losing past neutral and coming to a full flexion, when are you going to do that? Number one, if you can control 1.5 inches of thickness, that does not help you against a regular hand. It's not thick enough. And why are you training in the negative losing position? Like, none of that makes sense to me. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so not a big wrist curl guy.
Nor am I. We have a question here that says, this is Kevin Kirk. In the past 2 months, I've seen arm breaks, one in July in Edmonton, and most recently here at home at one of our practices. The first one I saw from afar, but this most recent one was only 10 feet away. Seeing and hearing that as someone who has only been in the sport for less than 9 months really shook me up a bit. I assume, or quite a bit. I assume that both of you have seen or maybe experienced this. Did it have an impact on you mentally? And if so, how did you move on from it? I can probably take this one off the bat, Gobby.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Sure.
I've seen quite a few arm breaks. I can honestly say that maybe it's my background in corrections or whatever, but I get desensitized to things and think that maybe it can't happen to me. My fear now is that when I'm training my daughter for arm wrestling, that I make sure she is well prepared to not be in the position or apply the pressure that would lead to her getting injured. So it's not so much for me the fact that it shook me up mentally to see an arm break. They're generally not random unless there's something else going on, like a deficiency somewhere that led to it. It's kind of more of a position and pressure thing in certain spots. I have never had one of my people I've trained break their arm. I have never had someone that I have had someone I've reffed. While refereeing, I had a person break their arm, and I gotta tell you, it didn't bother me to the level that maybe it should have. These things happen. Professionals have broken their arms and come back. The girl in Edmonton, I remember that. I didn't know what was going on until after. It was actually on a practice table off the stage, and it was someone that was not an arm wrestler that was messing around and unfortunately broke her arm. And I've seen it happen in tournaments where I've known it was coming and turned my head away before it happened. And that's kind of on the referees for not recognizing when that was about to happen. You take risks. I don't know. It just didn't bother me. It didn't. I felt for the person, but there's injuries in sports that are way more serious than that.
Yeah. I love talking about arm breaks. I think we don't talk about it enough. We post videos, but we don't talk about the science behind it that much. More and more we see every decade, I think we see a higher percentage of arm breaks. I think there's many reasons for it. Ironically, in the 70s and 80s when they used those donut pads, the table was more susceptible to hurting your arm compared to now where we have the offset pads, yet we still have more injuries. The optics of an arm break are a lot worse than the actual biological ramifications. I mean, it heals, and more times than not, you come back stronger. It's actually a great injury. I remember being on the table with Evan Begoin, we're fucking around, and he says, I'm going to try to break my arm. And I said, I'm going to try to break my arm. This is with our left arm, knowing that if it does break, we come back stronger. Of course, it's very hard to I mean, you can try to break your arm and it won't break. Anyway, I find that there's the biggest reason is we have people funneling into arm wrestling, much like 30 years ago, you have people funneling into arm wrestling. 30 years ago, 40 years ago, the people funneling into arm wrestling, 20, 30 years ago even, were laborers. It was a labor sport where laborers, welders, plumbers, electricians, mechanics gravitated towards. They had a physical nature to their trade, and it made sense to them, and they gravitated well towards arm wrestling. Their shit was already conditioned. Nowadays we have the people gravitating because we have less. The majority of people working are working on laptops. They don't do physical labor. Their tendons, their soft tissue attachments, their connective attachments aren't as strong. So we have bankers, accountants, salesmen joining arm wrestling, and they can be in the best position possible. If that stuff has not been conditioned over time, just through general day in, day out stuff, as soon as their joint gets on it, it can break. I had it happen with a guy I was training. Usually when you guys come train with me, this was in 2014 or 15, when they come train with me, I don't really pay attention to the new guys because there's such a the turnover rate of new people coming and quitting that I try not to really pay attention to anyone until like a year in or 6 months steady training. And this guy was with us for 3-4 months, and I noticed that he was a pressing guy, and he was a banker. And I told one of the guys, I told Mark Vachon, who was kind of running the team, I said, and he was really good with new guys, I said, keep an eye on him. He says, no problem. 3 months later, we went to a tournament, and he ended up showing up, and I knew he showed up. I didn't know if he signed up to pull. When I did realize that he was pulling, and I looked over at the table and he was pulling, and I said, he should be okay. And then I saw him dive into his press, and the other guy went through and his arm snapped. And I said, never again. Next time I train someone, they can do what they want, but I'm going to tell the next person that trains with me, specifically if they're not coming from a weightlifting or laboring background, that they need damn near 8 to 10 months on the table steady before they go to a competition, just to secure everything. The second reason is there's more hormones, there's more shit in our diet than there's ever been, more synthetic, more processed stuff. It takes away from our bone, the calcium, it draws out of our bone the calcium in our bones, so it makes our bones a little bit more brittle. You put all those things together, and yes, even moving forward, we're going to have more bone breaks. More kids are starting to arm wrestle. More women are starting to arm wrestle. So it makes sense to me, and it's scientific, and we need to address it. And it's easily rectified. And I think at least a third of the arm breaks we see, maybe even a half, can be stopped by the ref. The ref gets to it too late. I'm notorious from stopping a match way too early rather than way too late with novice or beginners. And I have no problem stopping it and explaining them why, or having them restart and encouraging them to be a little bit in a safer position and not pull with their joint. But it's a topic that needs to be addressed, and it's an interesting topic in our sport.
I can tell you that the loudest one that I ever heard in my life was Scott Stillwell.
Oh, well, he broke his arm? I didn't know that.
He broke his left arm before Tokyo. It was a year or two before. He was arm wrestling Bob Penner, who was just a magnificently huge man himself too. And it was in a small room in a small tournament, and it was loud. And Scott, we were in Yorkton, Saskatchewan. We had to drive all the way back. He just had a brace, and they just put him in a brace, and it was supposed to heal. Several months later, it had not healed yet. And he could take his elbow and turn his arm upward halfway up his humerus. And they had to go in and see what was going on. And Scott was a great big guy, had a muscle lodged in between the two bone ends, and it wouldn't heal. So he had he had a femur plate put in his arm, and he had the big zipper scar down the back of it. And most people that break their arm wrestling can come back and continue to compete, and Scott was at the Worlds not that far after.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I find that remarkable, because I've always said that maybe not now, but earlier in my career, if I would have broken my arm or even had a major injury, I was done with arm wrestling. I'd go into something else, and you'd think that would be the case for most people, but it's not. And I find that almost amazing that you can break your arm, tear a bicep. And whenever I see it, I figure we'll never see that guy again. And next thing you know, they're popping back up after rehab, and they're all geared up with that same arm. I'll be honest, I don't understand that.
Well, they come back, man. It's all, they love it.
Yeah.
You look around the tournament and you see those zipper scars down the back of arms, and they're everywhere. And the one girl where I was refereeing, where she broke her arm, she didn't continue to arm wrestle, but her husband and her kid did, and she shows up to support them.
Yeah.
And she's been through the healing process of that, and still supports her children coming in arm wrestling. So good on her, and good for recognizing that stuff happens sometimes that's outside of our control. And, man, if everyone was concerned that much about injuries, no kid would ever play football, ever.
If I had a kid and he was, coming into his mid to late teens and he wanted to do a sport, I'd rather him, even if there was a higher percentage of arm breaks, so let's even say like 10% or something ridiculous, I'd still rather him arm wrestle than play football or MMA, only because the arm heals. You rack your brain too many times. You're 50, 60 years old and you're one lost motherfucker. Like, that is, once you lose the mind or the lucidity in your head, an arm break all of a sudden doesn't seem that bad, or a scar down the back of your arm. So for me, these injuries, although they look terrible, they're not a gradual degenerative injury like head trauma, but the optics of one is terrible, because it's so acute and it's so explosive in the moment, and then you have that scar and this and that. But for me, it's almost sometimes when I see an arm break, part of me is like almost envious. It sucks at the time, and you feel for them. And the thing that gets me is not the arm break itself, is the expression on that person's face while they're sitting there, and the ref is trying to console them and sit them down, and so that as the shock takes over, and the expression on their faces are totally like, well, in shock, and adrenaline's kicking in. And you think it's painful, but I don't think they're ever feeling pain until hours later, right? But I think that's more for me. I find that more alarming than the actual break. But it's not that bad. It looks bad, but it's really not that bad.
But as far as moving on to Kevin, you accept the risk of doing an activity.
Well, and the thing is, either you fall in love with arm wrestling or you kind of don't. Some people kind of half-ass. Well, and I can see that coming. I can see guys coming into practices, and you can see how they want to ask you questions and how they're invested. But this is a cool sport in the way that it doesn't give you much in terms of popularity or in terms of monetary value. But fuck, if you fall for it, if it bites you, it can be a hell of a passionate ride. But if you're not sure about it, or you're calculating the pros and the cons of arm wrestling, you're probably going to be funneled out awfully quick. Don't.
100%.
Yes. Yeah.